Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Life in Business podcast. Seriously?
Mm,
I was thinking to phrase it differently. That doesn't sound right when I phrase whatever. I did.
it's
There's only
perfect.
so many ways you can say four words.
That's right.
This week, I actually have no notes sent to me from our social media head, so I don't know what we're doing. I assume you were sent something?
Well, yes. We are
Oh.
turning things on their head. We're turning things upside down, however we want to
Flipping
say
it
that this week.
around,
And
switching the board.
this week I'm going to interview you.
Okay.
So maybe the younger viewers might hear some stories from you that might resonate with them.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
And so I have just a couple of
Okay.
questions. Because I think we all have crazy stories, right? Everybody likes me to tell my stories that are, yes, admittedly, who could forecast that? But I think you have some as well. So, one of the first questions that we're going to ask is give it or tell us about the most unusual interview you ever had.
Like being interviewed or giving
Yes.
an interview?
Well, I would say being interviewed,
Being
really, for the
interviewed.
most part, right? Because
Yeah.
you've been job searching
Mm-hmm.
to support your independent business that you founded, but you've had a lot of interviews,
Yeah.
and so I think there's a bit of a story there in at least one of them. I know you've had some that are like switch and bait and stuff like that. Maybe that's what you want to talk about, but at the end of the day, I'm sure there's an unusual interview that you've had that you could share, and maybe the viewers could at least, get a little chuckle out of, if maybe not even have some, you know, understanding because maybe they've experienced it too.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bait and switch ones, I could tell, but that's kind of like, I feel like that's not super interesting, because it basically just surmises as they posted one thing, that's not what it was. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, um, I do have one for a position I did get back in 2024 when I was in LA for my California college retreat,
Mm-hmm.
whatever semester. And I remember leading up to it, it was really confusing because the California program said, oh, yeah, you get paired with an internship, yada, 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 yada. Well, they didn't exactly explain everything. You still had to find your own internship. It just was you were in California
Mm-hmm.
and we have a site that you can find them through. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a little different than how they sold it, but sure. And I remember there was a couple I talked to before landing on mine about a month into the program. And the one I got was this great kind of small video production group that hired a lot of freelancers and shot for big companies in the kind of media space. And things like, for those who know them, companies like Scopely, companies like kind of other small time or big time mobile devs for games and stuff like that, as well as for certain art shows and theatrical shows and things of that nature. And I know that was an interesting interview because it was one of the ones that didn't have an interview site, it was just an email that you emailed your stuff to. So I emailed them my resume, and they were like, yeah, let's have a conversation on call and then a conversation in person. I was like, okay. So we did a Zoom call. It went very well, I felt. And it was interesting because I didn't fully understand what the company was because all they said was, here's an email, send an email. So, first and foremost, I had no idea really what I was getting into other than they needed someone who had media experience. And I was like, okay. So I sent it in, I applied, and had that call, and they said, yeah, so we're a small kind of family run business and we're trying our best to put all these projects together and we have a lot of contacts in the space. And I was like, okay, interesting. And that's all I learned from that initial screening type interview. So then I go in person. They were based in quote unquote LA, but the actual place was in a different close by town that was part of Greater LA. And I went in, and it was basically this residential area. And I was like, well, this is a little confusing. And I found myself at one of those kind of small multi-apartment complexes where there's a building and it has maybe 8 apartments in it. And the interview was in one of the upper apartments. And I was like, okay. So I went up and showed up, and it was this apartment renovated to be this space with cameras and lighting and stuff of that nature, the small media space. And I was expecting to walk in and at least there be a desk or something of that nature. No, they just had this coffee table that they brought me to. And I sat across from the CEO, who was the one hiring me. And I remember because it was an interesting situation, because when I applied with a more generalist resume that I had, not a hyper specialized one at the time. And I remember the person I was talking to, the CEO who was eventually did hire me for this internship position, asked me the question, so what are you looking to do here? And I was kind of hard pressed because I didn't even know what we were doing at the company. So I was like, well, I just kind of want hands-on media experience, right? And he was like, interesting. And so it started, the contract I signed was I would work on sets, I would govern freelancers, I would do stuff like that for many different groups locally when we went to shoot. And so the shoots would typically be on Saturdays. I'd have to be there for about 5 to 6 hours, whatever. That was in the contract. What I actually ended up doing is I did a couple of those, but then he was at the time building the company out into other things, and so I was kind of put on lead for that a lot. But I thought it was an interesting interview specifically because it was one of the only positions I've had where it was a small family run business. I wasn't clear what I was getting into. And then really it came down to a position where it felt more like shooting the breeze, like you showed up, you have a good time, you go, and I had probably 6 hour days there every couple days. But I thought it was a weird interview experience because you go in knowing nothing. There was no real job listing other than we need someone who knows media. And then when I showed up and they're asking questions about what do you want to do, and I'm like, I don't even know what the position is because there was no info given to me. Turned out to be one of the coolest positions I've ever had, but it's just so weird because that's not what you expect at all going into a position like that. And I thought it was a funny one, at least.
Well, on another note, as I recall, that was your second intern while you were in
I
LA.
had two. Yeah, the other one was a film festival.
The first one, as I recall, is they hired you to be a creative writer, and then
And it wasn't a creative
they
writer
wanted
position.
you to use AI for everything. So talk to us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, there was this company. Calling it a company is very generous. It was a company, but it was a company run by one person. And similar to that other role I had, which was run by a family, in all fairness, but mostly one person. This one really facaded itself a lot better. It basically was this thing that said, oh yeah, we're this group that has run advertisements for all these big agencies. And if you go to their website, it says Home Depot and PetSmart and other local things. And what was really interesting is I recognized one of the ads they made, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting. I recognize this ad, which means they must be of some renown, And they were like, "Yeah, we need a writer," and I was like, "Oh, well, I can. That's my whole thing is writing, so I could write." And I got into the position, and I remember this. This is actually part of the reason I think I got that second one in February. But I was talking to my advisor, my LA advisor, about it. The position was hired to be you are a creative writer and stuff like that, to you are basically an AI translator. And this was before AI had the stranglehold it does now, where it was still known back in 2024 and pretty big, but it's not in the state it is current day, January 21st, 2026, So It was a person who basically hired me to train and use software to replace me. And it was like about 2 weeks in, I remember calling people and talking to them. They're like, well, it's a position in a position. I'm like, it is, but on a moral basis, I don't think I should be in this position because it's not only bad for me on paper, generally speaking, if I write, I trained AI to replace myself, but I wouldn't have, but you know what I mean. And the fact they bait and switched me into it and I fell for that up to the point where I was hired by them and I had to drop is crazy.
Well, and as I recall with all of that, I mean, that was during that whole writer strike and the
It
creative
was right
side of
before the
things.
writer's strike.
And I think, I mean, you flash forward 3 years, which we're 3 years ahead now, but at that point in time, I think the real frustration was that, you know, you were a creative, you wanted to be employed as a creative, and essentially this person and her company were saying, yeah, creatives are not not
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's no value there. We just 100% want to use AI.
Yep.
So that was one that resonated with me, one of the stories that you told.
Well, it's just insane because it's like that in fairness that has kind of become almost not a it was almost a forewarning for my job searching later because that was the first company that did it, right? And I was like, I would never expect a company to just outright lie about what they're hiring, you know. But that has been a consistent thing I've run into probably every couple months ever since, you know, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like the company phrases it as one thing, it is not that thing at all, you know, and it's like, I wonder why that seems to be so pervasive. Well, we talked about the fake job market, not that that's the
Mm-hmm.
same
Mm-hmm.
thing, and when we talked about that in season one, but it's stuff like that that makes you think, what how is this getting how are they getting away with this, like not that
Well,
it's against the law but like what like that's crazy.
and I look at it not just how are they getting away with it, but what's the long game with that? I mean, you're duping kids. I'm assuming that young professionals, I don't want to say kids, that's unfair. You're duping young professionals to come and work for you. They're not going to be happy
Hmm.
longer term. So I'm not really sure if you're building up your company what your longer term strategy is. It's
Yeah.
it's just an interesting model, and it's a model that I guess I've never worked in. So
Hmm.
I don't get it cuz usually you want a lot of transparency.
Yeah.
And again, being in HR, nothing upset me more than somebody coming in and saying, this job is not what was sold to me. Because you're like, well, that is not who you want to be,
Hmm.
right? Um, Now, sometimes some of the negatives aren't pressed, but it's gonna be you're gonna be working 8 hours a day, you're gonna be working 10 hours a day, but you don't want someone to think they're coming in to write and they find out that they're coding all day
Hmm.
or they're doing 10 key punch all day. That would be a terrible experience.
Well, and it's interesting because since then I have been in multiple different positions that require jack of all trades type
Mm-hmm.
of things that don't start that way. Like the other internship I did end up taking started as I would work with freelancers on set, turned into I am helping develop board games. Like that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't in my contract, but it was something that I was interested in, you know, so that
Mm-hmm.
was a natural progression. But the difference is in a position like that, that was a natural progression. It didn't start with me
Mm-hmm.
getting hired. Oh, you're working on board games. It's I got hired. I was doing that freelancer stuff, and then down the line they were like, "Oh yeah, you do these TTRPG stuff," and I was like, "Yeah, I do." And they're like, "Well, we wanted to expand into that," and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "I'd be more than willing and interested to look at that because that's intriguing." I even remember we as a business meeting for a board game, and this is one of my favorite experiences ever in a position. We went to IKEA and got one of those big tables you get in the dining area, and they brought a bunch of little hexagons, and they had this basic idea for a board game and said, what would you do with this? And we sat there for about 3 hours reorganizing these tiles and coming up with rules, and it was really fun and unique. But again, it was also prefaced to me
Mm-hmm.
a day or two before we did it that, hey, are you interested in that? And I said yes, so
Mm.
I think they almost paint as, well, other positions might do that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's a difference between hiring for something else versus becoming something else over a short
Hmm.
period of time, So, but yeah.
So another question I have for you, your company is kind of a jack of all trades company. You do media, you do these podcasts,
Yeah.
you set up websites. I know you're helping with some YouTube, some folks that are doing some YouTube
Hmm.
vlogs and things like that as well. But one of the things that I have found interesting that I know you do personally, but you do it under the umbrella of your company, is that you're publishing books, you're writing and you're publishing
Yeah.
books. So share a little bit with the listeners. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because it's one of those things that it's like it bleeds personal want with the company goals a little bit. And because here's the holistic self arrogant style I would want to take that is I would like to be a published author where I publish books and people read them.
Well, you are a published author.
Yes, but it's a little different, and I want to specify because when I think I want to be a published author, I want to publish stories. More
Mm-hmm.
recently, definitely poetry. I'm a big fan of poetry. Thing is, poetry is very undersold nowadays. It's just not
It's
something
not
people
popular.
buy. Yeah,
Yeah.
so going into that by itself would just be a fool's errand at the end of the day. And despite that, I have this company that does all these other things. And around 2023, I, with a friend, was getting really, really deep into the tabletop role playing scene. So, for people who don't know, that would be the Dungeons and Dragons of the world. For those who saw Stranger Things is based off Dungeons and Dragons almost holistically. But long story short, back then, me and an artist friend of mine were like, oh, we want to make our own book. So we wrote this short 30-page TTRPG supplement for the Dungeons and Dragons game and released that, and it did fairly well. We were quite impressed, and we were like, well, what if we did something more holistic? And it kind of started around then because in 2023, well, 2022 is where it kind of started when I was in college. I was realizing I didn't want to go into film, which is what I was studying as at the time, as much as I wanted to go into storytelling adjacent facets of media. And film is one of those, certainly, but music is a storytelling medium. Writing is a storytelling medium. And I was getting more and more into playing Dungeons and Dragons and games like that. And I was like, that's something I could do because it blends board game, technical writing efforts with storytelling because you have to be good at both to some extent. And so after writing that first book and doing well, I brought together a small team that ended up becoming the first project of my current company to kickstart and fundraise a bigger book. That book is another D&D supplement. It came out last year around when our podcast season 1 ended. That's when it was fully released for people to go and get, but it was kickstarted. We raised like double the amount we planned to, and we rolled that out over a year and a half. And what was interesting about that is it was only part way into that process where I thought I should really have a company to put this under instead of just me. So around October 2024, I got together with two people who helped work on that book in minor roles to form a company. And the reason we wanted to do that is one of those people wanted work experience outside of 9 to 5s, working at a Chipotle or a Chick-fil-A. And the other one wanted to make video games. And so I have this immense creative output, I've been told many, many times over, and I can facilitate making a lot of different written idea projects. So I came together with those two people and we made this company. Or, well, I made the company and they work as full-time contract people at the time until we can pay employment fees or employment wages and stuff properly. And that turned into a 3-part company. This is one of the parts of Phobe Productions under the bigger umbrella. And then there's 2 others. One of those others is Fragment Press. That's where all the publishing ended up going. And after the success of our second book coming out in really actually doing pretty well. We've sold now, and this is big for the TTRPG space, just for people's knowledge. We did sell around 150 books after the Kickstarter ended, because we sold, I think, 70 something during, which is a lot for a basically coming out of nowhere, not well known company, right? And now all of our written projects, while still authored by me, go through that.
Mm-hmm.
In another world, I'm working on my own personal stuff separate from the company I want to publish, but that will be a much more perilous road in the
Mm-hmm.
long
Mm-hmm.
term, just because that's more of a I'm doing it for the love of the game more than I think it's going to do numbers, you know? But for people who don't know, getting into that space, I had to study a lot of publishing stuff. And how does publishing work? How do you publish a book? What is an ISBN? I didn't know. So I had to learn what those were and stuff like that. And as we go into 2026, we have like 3 or 4 written projects we're planning to release. So we're like, okay, how do we plan this? How do we approach it? You know? But that's a part of my work that also blends with a lot of my personal contract stuff. So it's something that is, no matter where I go, it will always show up, because it's just, I naturally have all these ideas I want to do something with, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where they go. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing, because self-publishing versus company publishing are two different beasts too. And it's something that if you have the attention and you have people who are passionate, like the team I had for that Kickstarter book, it can be a really cool experience, even if it is a bumpy road on the way, because especially in stuff like the TTRPG space, art is a big deal. I can't draw for my life. So I have artist friends who help out. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a weird space. It's a lot more complicated than a lot of people might think it is. And I think that's, I don't know, it's part of the fun of it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So
Well, in doing all that, there were challenges. What was the biggest challenge that you faced self-publishing like that through your company?
I think the hardest thing, and this is something we kind of predicted going in, is getting the team to work together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had an artist who is a great friend of mine, and they are responsible for the covers of the book as well as a lot of the bonus art for the Kickstarter exclusive version of the book. And what was really tough is part way through that experience, they had real life conflicts that came into
Mm-hmm.
play. And it started as 1 or 2, you know, and we had that they were the main big art person on the project. So 1 or 2, okay, whatever, we can delay a few months. It's not the end of the world. 1 or 2 became 5, 10, 15, and then
Mm-hmm.
it dominoed. And you're like, okay, well, luckily we had the position where we had our second artist. I had already talked to that artist in case something like this would happen, that they could pick up all the internal art that the other one might not be able to do. But it was really hard going from the this is my group of friends and we just want to make something cool, to we have a deadline, we have a goal, I have to be kind of
Mm-hmm.
the boss, you know? And I'm still not good at that. I'm not good at being the boss. I'm just not built for a position like that. I care too much. But it's something that I had to learn on that project, right? How do I manage a team? How do I get people together? And stuff of that nature. And I had not only that, but I also even had a familial connection working as an editor on that book. And while that wasn't as difficult, it was, I had to make sure they understood the guidelines. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just because we're family, this is a business project. You're
Mm-hmm.
being hired for a job, you know. It's different. And I remember I had to give them, and they're a younger sibling of mine, but I had to give them their first contract documents that they had to sign, because the company had to write it or put it into their filings. And that was a weird experience, you know, putting those
Mm-hmm.
out for the first time. But I think it's no one of those individual things, but the whole project and administration management side of it was probably the hardest part. It wasn't the getting the art to fit the book or getting the words in the book. That's not hard. The print tests, annoying, sure, but it was a predictable process to some extent. It's the administration side of governing the team of, I think we had up to 8 at one given time, people, and being the sole author, everything rides on me to write it too. And we had a book designer, so I had to write it so they could design it. Then we had an artist, so I had to write it so they could design it so they could draw. So it's, there's so many steps. And if I'm, which we are going to do more of those in the future, having a more holistic plan of who goes where when is something we need to do. And with our current projects, I have, for a video game project we're working on, I'm not the leader of it, but I'm overseeing the leadership of it, and I'm making sure they don't make those same mistakes. Because when you learn it once, you're like, I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. So that was tough.
It's so interesting that you say that. I have a couple of acquaintances. I don't think I would consider them close personal friends, but colleagues out in the world that, they're very passionate and a little bit more creative than I am, and they have wanted to do books. And the number one thing that I hear is, they were fortunate enough to get contacted by a big publisher, or I don't know if they're a big publisher, but a professional publisher.
Publisher.
And one of them actually backed out because of all the things that you described.
Yeah.
She just wanted to go out and take pictures and write a few words about these places that she went and saw. But it has to be put into all those things that you said. You have to think about what the story is and make sure you take a picture in a way that it can be implemented into the book and it can hold together for a reader. And she said it just stifled my creativity. And I didn't quite understand that because I thought, well, of course I'm a business person, right? But I thought, well, you have to adapt to whatever the medium is. So it's interesting to hear you tell that side of the story.
Yeah, it's very intriguing because I had, out of college, a poetry collection that was up for publishing with a big company. And unfortunately, this fell through because that company's division I was working under fell apart. But I'd have company contacts now because of that. And ever since then, I've written multiple small poetry projects, and I've contacted multiple publisher contacts about it. And very similar to that, I've had multiple of them come back to me. And the exact wording is so hilarious. I have people coming back to me saying, this is one of the most brilliant ways this could be done, yada, 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 yada. And they go on and they praise and they say all these good things and then end it with, but it's a little too experimental for the space. It's brilliant, but this is not something you should put out because it's not going to be
there's no genre
there's no genre for it at this time, and you're going to have to build it into something and make this whole path. And it's like, I understand that frustration, and it's part of the reason I do self-publishing is because there is a value in the weird stuff. And I feel like, especially as media becomes homogenized and oversimplified and easy to tell. It's like poetry, for example, is a really good example of this. We went from Plath and Frost, super interesting, intricate storytelling through poetry, to 5-word poems that you see on an Instagram post and that's it. And it's like, you're losing part of the medium. It's kind of similar with how literature is going right now, where we see less complicated literature and we see a lot more literature leaning in the direction of either being so eccentric that it's not clear or so oversimplified to the extent where there's nothing there, And it's why you see, like, in the young adult space, the same 5 or 6 themes appear across almost every single book in that space because that's what sells. And as literature becomes less and less the dominant medium, you have a lot of those things being, okay, how can we sell the most books, not how can we tell interesting stories, which used to be what literature stood for, So yeah, I totally understand that. And it's the reason I don't go to a publisher and be like, here is a really dumbed down simplistic thing. Because yes, it's a foot in the door, but to a creative like me, that is the equivalent of saying, oh yeah, you can run a race, but we're going to chop off both your legs before you run. It's the same idea in the creative sense of you are removing the thing that makes this person unique to what they do, which is the whole thing about creative generative work, right? Or that was a bad generating creative work is what I meant to say. So yeah, I totally resonate with that because it's like, especially in our self-publishing thing, the ideas in our books we have published have been praised by multiple outlets for being so uniquely inventive. And we once had a quote of someone emailed to us, it wasn't publicly posted, but emailed to us, that said, this really pushes the system to its limits. It's the furthest you can go without making your own thing, basically. And they were impressed how much we could pull that off, confined to that system. And they were interested in seeing us expand into our own thing, because they think we could be a big disruptor in the space if we took the time and just made our own separate thing, which is now what we're doing under that advice. But, it's stuff like that that is the most interesting and engaging creative work to me. You know, it's the stuff that really tries to be its own thing and doesn't try to replicate what you've seen 100 times, because it's like, who cares? You know, it's like, all right, it's going to go to the pile of YA everyone has read already. You know, it's okay, whatever.
Teenage vampire crap.
Exactly. So
I'm
it's
so sick
like,
of it.
it's not as interesting. So anyway, I'm over explaining, but I resonate with that experience because it's definitely nothing a person who is creative minded wants to do, because it is sacrificing art for publishability, and that's something no one I know would ever want to do to their work, because it's a good way to put it, it's removing the teeth. You know, it's like, it's still a pretty picture, but you've removed the thing that gives it the pizzazz, you know, so.
Well, here's another one. So, some of the viewers may not know that you do virtual tabletop games.
Yep, I run them
That's,
professionally
yep,
online. Yep.
that's a job that you have and you get paid to do that. And unlike many, you actually spend a lot of time writing the storyline and
Yep.
developing it and working with players to build in stories they may want to see, opportunities, engagements, interactions with other characters that they may want. What is it about that? I mean, obviously you're creative, so I don't want this to be a rhetorical question,
Yeah.
but what is it about that that really, excites you? Because you get really excited before the games and going into the
Yeah.
games. And I know
Well,
you put so much into them, you have to limit how many games you'll host.
yeah. It's one of those things that is a great example that, so to to generally explain what the position is, for games like Dungeons and Dragons, you have a person called a game master who runs the game, and then everyone else is a player. So think Monopoly, the banker, the person who plays the bank, if that was its own dedicated role. That's what I do, right? And the difference in games like Dungeons and Dragons is the game master tells the entire story. It says where you are, what you're doing, whatever. The players react, right? It's like a very complicated choose your own adventure book, right? Is a good way to put it, where the game master decides what are the choices and the players write the rest of the story. Now, that's a really interesting thing, because I remember it was you, I think, who told me about a year before I started doing that, because I did it at home with friends, right, all the time. And you said, I wonder if that would be a career, you know? And turns out it is. I just didn't want to do it at the time, because as soon as I was worried that the age old advice of, and I've said this on a previous podcast, if you combine your passion with work, you know, is it the same, you know? And that's something I didn't think too much about at the time, but I was already writing these books, right? So I was not really putting it two and two together, but I'm like, I already do this, I might as well do it anyway. So about a year later, I did try on a website to do that. There's this online service you can purchase games from a game master through, and I've signed up for that. And basically, it's a show up, pay an amount per session, which tend to last 3 to 4 hours, and you play the game. And what makes that super interesting is the reason I like it so much is multifaceted. One, I'll cover the creative side first, just because it's the easiest to cover because it will follow the last talk we had, is those games have a form of creativity and storytelling no medium can replicate. Because you're sitting down with a bunch of other people, all of you have equal control over how the story plays out. And for me, the enjoyment there is that every single player at the table has brought their own character, their own story of who they want this person to be. You're basically making a main character for a book. And I have to facilitate all those characters in a bigger story, you know? So I am instructing the cast. It's like a great example is I'm running a game very similar to, say, Harry Potter, for those who would know that, where all these people go to this magic school and they do all this cool stuff, and I get to introduce conflict and antagonists and enemies and see how they react. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of my friends who have tried to do it after I've done it so much, and they're like, I do not see how you continually do this, right? And on one hand, it is, yes, that creativity. I love writing stories. I love doing stuff like that. On the other hand, I have an immense joy watching people have a good time doing something, and being able to be in the position of people trusting me with their creative ideas and then facilitating those creative ideas into a wider narrative and stuff like that is really, really interesting, to the extent that you asked earlier, or you mentioned earlier, I don't run too many of them because I spend so much time with them. When I get these characters, I try to pick apart every little aspect, you know, and some players send you 5 pages worth of character backstory. You're like, okay, how much of this do I need to know? But it's a combination of that with you're playing a board game with whatever. And in a game like that, it's a lot more expressive. So there isn't one board that is always the same every time. It's in one game they're going through a magical school where they go into a dungeon and they find out old machinery exists and it changes how magic works, and it's like, okay, that's cool. In another story, the world's ending, towns are disappearing, they have to figure out why. In another one, it's a horror game and there's monsters. And it's the idea that, one, so many ways to express people as well as yourself in a game like that. But secondly, it's very weird playing it as a paid game master, because on one hand, it feels like I have to make the best story I can. And I've run into situations where players don't think I've written the best thing I can. And I go out of my way to sit with those players and understand, what do you want, right? And I find an immense joy in watching people experience media. I think, like, everyone knows when you go to a movie theater and it's a great movie and there's this big scene that is hyped up or whatever at the end of the movie. I think a great example, I don't know if you probably wouldn't know this, but when Avengers Endgame came out in 2018, that was a culmination of 20 years of movies, or 10 years of movies. And so everyone in that theater, when the cool scenes happen and the big payoffs happen, there's an electricity, right? And those games replicate that to me. You know, now the players might not have that same experience I do, but I find it very electrifying watching them see cool stuff happen. We just had a game recently where there is this big deer guy who's super scary or whatever, who is the herald of the end times. In the first game of this multi-session game, he was shown being this super overpowered, super scary guy, and the players can't do anything about him. That was the point. 5 games later, they're ending the first arc of the story, and they're about to leave. And the thing that happened in session 1 where the town starts disappearing and this deer guy shows up happens again. And seeing the anxiety and the, oh God, we got to get out of here, right, reaction, I find that so invigorating, because it's like I was able to make something that convinced these people to act this certain way with their characters. And that's really cool. I really enjoy that because it's almost like you're making a movie, but instead of making the movie then waiting for to see reactions, you see it in real time. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really cool because you get to adapt and respond. And it uses a lot of improv skills too. You have
Mm-hmm.
to be pretty good at adapting on the fly and things like that. Where a player when you're like, oh yeah, you got to sneak into this guard fort. One of the players kicks the door open with 50 guards inside. You're like, oh no, how do I adapt to this situation?
Mm-hmm.
It really challenges you to be good at that. And I don't think I'm great. I think I'm just okay, right? Maybe
Well,
my players would disagree, but yeah, it utilizes a lot of skills. And the reason I like it as a position too is I get to do what I like doing, you
uh-huh.
know? And I don't do too many because I put too much effort
But
into
you get
them.
paid. I mean, it's a good way to
So
pick up some change on the
it
side.
is for
Yeah.
sure. If anyone's interested in that, I definitely recommend looking into it. It's really worth the time if you have the attention and the detail
Well,
for
and
it.
I have to say it surprised me because it's virtual. These
Mm-hmm.
sessions are virtual, and my next question will be different about the face-to-face ones that you've done. But it was hard for me to imagine that people would be willing to pay to play a virtual game. But
Mm-hmm.
you said something earlier, and I was like, oh, I get it. It's like watching a TV show or a great movie or a mini series, which are so popular, but you're influencing the
You're
storyline.
in the story.
And so I can really see, especially if, you don't have friends near you that are into that, or if it's an outlet for you because, you work so hard all week long and you just want a night that not everybody wants to stream stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And my husband and I are streamers, but we get to the point of we've seen everything we want to see, and then you're waiting for something new. With what you've described, you can create it, right? Every week there's a new opportunity.
Well, and it's as a hobby, it's really hard to find because it's not a game that you can do in one go.
Yes.
These are games that take 50 hours,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at minimum, if you're running 5 hours a day, that's 10 different sessions or
Mm-hmm.
5 hours a time. That's 10 sessions. Most people don't do that, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So it's like, that's another aspect is people really wish they could do more of this. It's
Mm-hmm.
just people who like doing it, like myself, are very rare to come
Mm-hmm.
by, I have learned. Hence why I have almost never been a player in these
Mm-hmm.
games. But yeah, what was your next question following
So
that?
my next question is, you've also done a few of these, and through this online service, you do in-person ones,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of people don't do. I know you're in the greater Atlanta area, but I know you've done some for corporate events. I
Mm-hmm.
know that you've like done birthday parties for teen
Yep.
age kids. Talk to me a little bit about how that's different when you do that, because that's a different level of creativity.
I think what's more interesting about that is how I would phrase the approach is different,
Mm-hmm.
right? The digital way of running games like that, you get a lot of benefits of having all the tools you want at hand. And that's cool, right? It makes it easy to run, it makes it consistent, and that's not an issue. I have like 5 of the same. I basically have a setup on my browser that I hit one button, all the stuff I need opens at once, right? And that's useful. In person, you can't do that, right? So it takes a lot more in person to do, but there is a very fun difference to in person because now I'm not good at acting per se, but I like dressing up. I like playing pretend, you know? And so I'll give an example of that a birthday party I did where I drove about an hour north of Atlanta. And basically, it was for a girl's 16th birthday party, and she had all her friends. None of them had ever played, basically. Some of them had, not all of them, but some of them had played. And I was hired by the dad to run the game. And so I wanted to make it super special because it was in person. So I got little cardboard laser cut figures that they could keep. I had bought a wizard hat and a giant beard to play this super eccentric over the top wizard. And it was great because during the game, I said, players, I want you all to close your eyes. And then they close their eyes. I put on my little hat and I say, players, you may open your eyes. And they all turn to me in this giant beard and massive hat playing the super eccentric over the top character. And what's more fun is you see the lighting up in eyes when you
Mm-hmm.
do stuff like that. And I would say while the complexity of the storytelling is a lot harder to pull off in person, it's still fun. I know at college I ran games with like 15 people sometimes, and when you have that many characters, it's really hard to nail it. So I became very accustomed to giving multiple smaller groups tasks to do while I go to other groups to do things. And I remember we just rented out this little hall that I would stand up and walk around with a giant presenter board behind me, and I'd be like, players, you're in a dungeon, and they'd have to figure it out. But in situations like that, the difference is, at least for me, I don't think as much about the story as much as how is the table playing,
It's the
because
experience for
yeah,
you. Yeah.
it's in digital, it's much harder to tell what people want. So you got to be a lot more precise. Where in person, I can much clearly tell who is in and who is out. And I remember for that birthday party, for example, I was mentioning, one of the players was really struggling to get into it. And so, as part of that, and I could tell because they didn't say anything, but I could see it on their face because they were new. It's a complicated game. So, I made sure in the final fight, I gave them ahead of time a small MacGuffin item that was super special that their character found. And I was like, here it is. And I gave them like a physical item. And then in the big fight, when the players were on their last hope, last leg, I looked at that player and I was like, that thing I gave you, yada, 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 yada. Suddenly that player's super into it because I could react in real time to them struggling to get into it by giving them a big moment. And that is a lot easier in person. And I do feel like on the whole, in person is run easier for reasons like that. But it's much harder to tell a cohesive story in person. So it's almost a different beast. It's more like a episodic Shark of the Week versus a multifaceted Game of Thrones season. You know, it's its own different ordeals, I feel like.
So the reason I know we're not at time, but we're getting closer to time. The reason we did something different, although admittedly there was no practice here. I surprised you with these questions and even with the turn of events. Is usually this is about interviewing a very experienced business professional who's now retired, and I tell the stories and my experiences and things like that, which together we want to help people in their professional
For sure.
space. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this differently is, one, I think I can certainly get boring to people listening to the same stuff over and over. But secondly, life is more than just business.
Oh, it is.
And, I started out in a very administrative job. I think I've talked about this on the podcast. I had my master's degree. It was a very tough time back in 1993, 94. It was a tough time to find a job, much like it is today. The experience was different because not everything was so digital, and I mean, you literally were looking at one ads and papers and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
and you were sending them physically out.
Physically sending resumes that got returned with rejected, not solicited and things like that. That kind of put a little bit of a scar on your soul. But there are other aspects of life, and I think. Sorry, my headphones just said something crazy to me. So I don't know why they just started going off. But the thing for me that I thought would be interesting this time for the viewers, because I think you've told me before that the demographic on the viewers is that they're a little bit younger.
Between us, yeah.
Yeah. And so I do look at that and say, there are opportunities, as hard as it may be, and you're going to have to be a bit of a hustler, right? Because you're not going to have that 9 to 5. But there are opportunities to find ways to fill in your time.
Yep.
And you have become, through your company, kind of a contract person. You go and you do this work for 4 or 5 months, then you go and you do this work for 4 or 5 months, and all of that is going to support your business, which is your passion. And I know you would like to have something that was a little less contract, so you had that stability on the one side. But I think there are other people out there that are struggling, and there's no shame. I don't believe, I mean, like I said, I took a job basically as a secretary with a master's degree. There's no shame in working at Home Depot
I agree.
or, cooking at Applebee's or doing a waiter type of position. There's no shame in that, because we all have to live. We have to pay bills, we have to eat, we have to have shelter, we have to have a car. But there are ways to fill in that time. And I think for me, one of the reasons I wanted to ask all these questions is all the things that you're filling in your time with still are resume builders.
Mm-hmm.
They still help you learn how to interact with people, how to sell, how to adapt. And I think there's a way for all newer career folks to think about how do you work on your resume
Mm-hmm.
so that you can pull through some of those things. I mean, if it's not a paying job, you're lucky because a lot of these things are paying jobs for you, but for somebody who it's not a paying job, you can still learn from those experience and find a way to answer questions when you're in an interview that sell that you have experience. The last thing that I'll share, and I know you were part of this too, my daughter is in college and she is interviewing for some summer interns and some programs and things like that. And she's she's not really had to do heavy interviewing before,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's common. I mean, she's a freshman in college, and sure, she interviewed for college, and sure, she's had little things here or there, but the kind of the pressure of the interview and preparing for the interview and being 18 has been a big burden for her, and
Mm-hmm.
she's stressed out. And one thing that she interviewed for, one thing, she only interviewed for one thing, she didn't get. And so she said, well, I'm not a good interviewer. And I think we're all likely to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said to her is, as successful as I have been subjectively, for every one thing that I got, there were two or three things that I didn't get.
So a quote I like a lot related to what you're saying is to win, you have to learn to lose 100 times.
That's right.
And I almost live by that mantra today,
Well,
but
it's
I think it's
painful.
important.
It is
Yeah.
hard to be rejected. But one of the things that I did with her, which is, I promise, is bringing this all together, is we sat down and I said to her, what is the story that you want to tell? I mean, at 18, she did an internship this summer that she didn't have to interview for, and she's done a lot of volunteer work. She's done missions because she went to a religious high school, and so she's had a lot of really interesting life experiences that I haven't had. But what the advice I gave her, which is the same advice that I hear coming through from your stories, is you've got to figure out what is the story you're wanting to tell.
Mm.
And somewhat you get some very specific, very generic questions in your screen, right? And so you want to find a way to pull that story in. And so she and I sat down a couple of weeks ago at our kitchen counter, and we would practice some questions. And she would say, oh, she had this great story about how she saw somebody stopped along the side as they were walking into this enormous orientation for her college freshman course. I mean, there's like, this school is like, I think
It's crazy big.
it is, it's huge. I
Crazy
think
big.
her entering freshman class was like 50 some thousand kids or
It's huge.
something. It's enormous. And so she was heading in. Now, they weren't all there, obviously, because it's a smaller group on campus, but they were heading in and she saw this person stopped. And she has the two of you have a lot of similar characteristics
Mm-hmm.
in that she feels deeply. And
Mm-hmm.
so she saw this person and stopped to talk to them. And yet when she was telling me the story, it became about, well, this endangered moth that this person found. And so she said, oh yeah, because we saved this endangered moth. And I said, well, that is a wonderful part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're interviewing for a leadership position or a resident assistant or something like that, that's not the story you want to tell. You want to tell a story of how you identified that somebody was feeling isolated and alone. You engaged with them. You tried to bring them out. You found commonality with them so that you could talk. And then you re-engaged them in the experience that they were meant to have. Obviously, this person was really stressed out and there were lots of reasons why. And so I'm not trying to say I know best, and I'm not, she hasn't done all of her interviews. I'm not sure that that's going to be 100% successful for her because she has to figure out her story. But I think the things that you tell in this is how you would interview. So you have all these little side gigs, and somebody could look at your resume and say, well, he just jumps from thing to thing to thing. His company's kind of all over the place. It's his company, right? But there is a way to sell that, which is why you keep getting the contract work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is because it's like, well, these are the things that I've learned. I've learned that I have to bring people together. I've learned that that's not a skill that comes to me naturally. I've learned that I've had to reprioritize things. When one person didn't get the work done, I had to shift it to somebody else. But I had to make sure I didn't break that relationship, because these are friends as well as contract workers, as well
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
people that I just love and care about. And so I think the one of the reasons I want to turn this on its head today with a different way of approaching the conversation is there's so many different ways that you can bring through the experience. And I think sometimes when we're young and we're starting out, we do think that experience, the only thing that we should talk about is I went and I did this and I got paid for it, versus some things, yeah, maybe it's a side gig. Maybe I'm hustling to do this, I'm hustling to do that. Maybe some of it isn't even paid. It's just an experience that you've had volunteering. Maybe you're into the Humane Society. Maybe you're into putting things out on forums. And all of that can be positioned in a way that's honest to show the life skills and the experiences that you have that may not pull through from a paying job. So just because you're a cook today at Applebee's, or you're waiting tables at Chili's, or you're working at Target, don't feel like that's going to be your forever. Take all those experiences and keep stretching and figure out what is the story that you want to tell to sell yourself for whatever that dream job is.
Well, and I'll add one last note into here that I think is important. Is I recently interviewed for a position, and something about that position was interesting because on my resume I don't have every single personal thing I do for myself,
Mm-hmm.
but I review games that I play, video games specifically, and when I play them, I write down my thoughts and throw them on a website and forget about them. And in a recent position I interviewed for,
Which you got, by the
which
way.
I got, yeah. They specifically went to that site and said, we went and read your reviews, and that's exactly what we want in this position, because it was kind of a game journalist
Mm-hmm.
group. And that's not something I would have figured would get me any sort of entrance anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just, oh, it's something I do. It's a hobby. I play games. But that's an example in the last 3 to 4 weeks that I'm like, I wouldn't have thought that would help me for anything. But yeah, I think that's a good time to wrap up the episode. I think we've had a good chat, and we'll see everybody next week for whatever we talk about then. Well then, thank you all for coming. I'll see you all next time with Jolie here, my fantastic co-host. Have a great rest of your day, and see you guys next week. Goodbye.